Hello, welcome to Z Marie Design. Let's create a holiday gift bag. Now this design is based on the video by the Crafty Gemini, and I'll leave a link in the description to her video. It's a drawstring bag and it's fully lined. So I'm going to create my gift bag for this memory bear that I made for my friend. And I'm going to start by measuring the size of the bear. Now to that measurement, I'm going to add 3 to 4 inches. I'm also going to measure the width of the bear, and to that size I'll add 2 to 3 inches. Now I'm going to cut 2 panels for my main fabric to that size, so it measures 24 by 14 for my bear. And I'm going to also cut 2 panels for the lining for that. And now the lining, I had enough of the length, so I'm going to have that on the fold. The main fabric it was too short, so I'm going to have 2 panels, and I put in 1/2 inch seam allowance to seam those together. And it measures 24 by 14. Now the first bag that I made, I measured it where it measured 21.5 by 12. I thought it was a bit snug. You'll see it at the end. So I created it a little larger, 24 by 14. So add at least 3 to 4 inches to your number for the length and 2 to 3 for your width. So to get started, put your fabrics right side facing, and you're going to pin together the short seams. And you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance along that short seam. Now that my short seams have been sewn, I have my fabric. This is my lining and this is my main fabric. So my main fabric has a center seam, but if yours is on the fold, you're just going to grab it in the center, and now those short seams will become the center. And I'm going to make sure that those seam allowances are going to be pressed in opposite directions so that I can nest those seams and pin those seams together. So I'm pinning the seams together, and the next step then is to take some measurements. So from the end of the seam allowance on my main fabric, I'm going to measure down 1 inch, and I'm going to put a mark on both sides of my main fabric. And then I'll come down another inch and I'll put another mark. So 1 inch mark and a 2 inch mark on both sides of my main fabric. That creates my casing. So then this will be the width of your casing for the drawstring. Now I'm going to also measure at least 3 to 4 inches to leave an opening on my lining to turn the bag right side out. And now when I do my markings so that I know to start and stop, I'm going to make an X with my pins because we have several starts and stops as we're going to sew. So at each of my markings, I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to just make an X. So the next thing that we're going to do is cut out the bottom corners so that we can box the bag so that it'll stand up. So I'm going to take 1.5 inch seam allowance. You can take 1.5 inch or 2 inches. I'm going to mark 1.5 inches square on one corner, and I'm going to cut out that corner, and then I'll use that as my template to cut out all of the other 3 corners. So that becomes the pattern. So now that my box corners are cut out, I have all of my markings. I'm going to pin together the long side seams of the raw edges, and I'm going to sew, starting at the bottom of the box corner, back stitching all the way up to my marking, and just back stitch at each of your markings. I cut my thread in between, just so I can make sure that I'm right at my markings. And then I'm going to sew. Don't sew your box corners yet. So now everything has been sewn. I have my casing opening and I have my lining opening. I'm going to press these seams open. It'll just make it easier for the casing, and it'll make it easier to find the seam allowance for the opening when we turn it right side out, and also when we get ready to box the corners. So to box the corners, since my lining is on the fold, I'm going to put a pin there so I know exactly where that bottom seam will be. Bring your bottom seam up to meet your side seam. And those side seams are pressed open. And you're going to pin these together and take a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you'll do this for all 4 of the box corners. Now if they don't exactly meet, just make sure that those side seams are matching. So I have the opening for my casing, the opening for my linings, and my corners are boxed. I'm going to trim those box corners. We took a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to trim it to a 1/4 inch. And you can use your pinking shears for this if you like. Then through my lining, through my opening, I'm going to turn the bag right side out. So just pull everything right side out. And as I'm pulling everything right side out, I'm going to make sure to push those box corners in so that they're nice and crisp. Then I'll push in my seam allowance for my opening on the lining, and I'm just going to top stitch that closed, about 1/8 of an inch. And then give your entire bag, give it a really good press. Before you close your lining opening, just make sure that your box corners are pushed out really nicely. So next, let's mark where those openings are for the casing. I'm going to take my measurements. If they are too small, if they're not 1 inch, if I've sewn a little bit too much, I'll unpick at this point. And I'm going to take my ruler and mark at each of my openings. And you're going to do this marking on both sides of the bag. This is a friction pin, so it'll come off with heat. Use some sort of marking tool where the ink will disappear. And now I'll put my lining inside my bag, pushing in those box corners as I insert the lining. So next I'm going to press that lining inside so that it doesn't creep out the top. And then I'll top stitch that lining to the top of the bag, all the way around. Now when I do my top stitching, I increase the stitch length to 3.0 just to make it look more crisp and professional. So now that I have my top stitching all done at the top, I'm going to go ahead and sew my casing where my markings are all the way around, and I usually start at one of the openings. You can see where I'm inserting my fingers, that's opening up my casing. And so when you're sewing all the way around, you're sewing your lining and your main fabric, you're sewing it together to create that casing. So now you can see my red stitching, you can see where the top stitching is and where the casing opening is. So now the next step is to create the drawstring. Just inserting my fingers to show you where my casing opening is. Now you can make this casing opening as wide as you like. And you can see as I lay my drawstrings down that they will fit nicely in that 1 inch opening. Now to create my drawstring, I'm going to cut my drawstring fabric. You can use ribbon, which I'll show you in the next step. That's what I'm going to use. But to create the drawstring opening, you can just cut strips of fabric 2 inches by 36 inches long. And so you're going to fold it in half to create a crease, and you're going to give it a press. And then you'll fold those raw ends in toward the crease. And so all of your raw edges are inserted. And then you'll top stitch along the top, both sides of that drawstring. And it'll be nice and crisp and long. So I'm going to insert my ribbon as my drawstring. I'm just putting, you can use a bob pin, I'm just using a safety pin. I'm going to start on one end of my opening, and the same side that I'm going to start in is the same side that I'm going to come out of. So I'm just inserting it in, and I can feel my pin as I go along. And you'll need 2 drawstrings. That measures about 1 inch by 36 inches. And 36 is just a number. You can make it as long or short as you want. So the same side that I went in is the same side that I come out of. And I make sure that everything is lined up, and I'm going to just tie it off on the ends. That's one drawstring that's done. And now I'll take my second drawstring. I'm going to go in the opposite side, inserting my pin on my ribbon. So I have one going in one side, one going in the other side. So the opposite side that you go in, remember that's the same side that you come out of. So you will bypass the string that's already inserted as you go around. So you can fill your pin or your bobbin, and you see I came out of the same side that I went in. And then I will pull it until everything measures totally even, and then just give it a turn and twist it and give it a tie off so that it doesn't go back into the bag, and you're all done. And your holiday fabric gift bag, these are reusable gift bags. They are all done. You can make it to measure, or you can just make one size that fits everything. So I'm going to insert my bear, and now you see it's a little more snug than I prefer, so that's why I added the 4 inches to it and made it a little bigger, so it measures 24 inches by 14 inches, so it's not quite as snug. And I'll show you in the next shot the bag that I eventually made, the largest size for the bear, but I'll keep this bag for something else. And you see you can insert everything and it stands up nice and straight. You see how snug it is as you're getting it out, but it matches beautifully. And that's the bag that I made to fit the next one. So I hope you like this project, and I hope you give it